She said a radical Muslim is someone who prays 5 times a day, someone who believes in the word of the Quran. To alienate the Muslim community, create them as the other, and to start making over-exaggerations about these potential attacks that haven't happened just because you grew up in the Middle East and because you speak Arabic and you understand the culture and that's where you get your credibility from. I understand the culture and I speak the language too. My parents chose to come to the United States from living under military occupation in Palestine.
You guys may be familiar with Brigitte Gabriel, a Lebanese Christian pro-Israel Islamophobe that the Zionist propagandists like to wheel out as their token Arab that hates Muslims for simply existing, just like they do. What's interesting is this complete shill of a woman hasn't actually debated anyone of any substance. Sure, she's had a couple of appearances on Piers Morgan's show where she's been allowed to ramble Israeli lies justifying why that evil regime should genocide and starve civilians and children, but never an actual real debate, as I said. I did, however, find a clip where Brigitte came up against a very articulate Palestinian American Muslim sister who absolutely wiped the floor with her. Let's take a look.
You said the radicals are estimated to be between 15 and 25%, according to all intelligence services around the world. That leaves 75% of them peaceful people. Where does that statistic come from?
That statistic comes from the combined intelligence of the Australians, the Canadians, the Jordanians, the Israelis, the United States, countries that share intelligence who are now monitoring what's happening in the world today.
You're saying 180 million to 300 million Muslims are radicals?
But you're talking about that fraction out of 1.2 billion people. Now, the majority of 1.2 billion people are peaceful people. They are not strapping bombs on their bodies. They are not going out blowing up people. They don't want to kill people.
Nor are the 15 to 25%.
15 to 25% are radicalized. Now, not every single one of them wants to blow himself up, but they either support terrorists who want to blow themselves up, provide them with financing, provide them for money, provide them with logistical support. 15 to 25% have been radicalized.
Brian, Miss Gabriel speaks out of 2 sides of her mouth. I mean, first of all, in one breath she'll say the West must support moderate Muslims and the moderate Muslims must speak up against terrorism. And in the same breath she'll say peaceful Muslims are irrelevant. Miss Gabriel needs to make up her mind when it comes to what is radical Islam. When asked by Australian News, she said a radical Muslim is someone who prays 5 times a day, someone who believes in the word of the Quran, which is the Muslim holy book, someone who believes the Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him, is a perfect man. That's basically every Muslim. So I have no idea what she means. And where is the room for moderate Islam?
The moderate Muslims, they can organize. Where are their collective voices? Where are the voices of the moderate Muslims speaking when girls kidnapped by Boko Haram disappear and we still do not know where they are?
We hear that quite a bit on Fox News. Where are the moderate Muslims? What's the answer to that question?
There are people out there that stood up on Boko Haram, on terrorism, on 9/11. There are national Muslim organizations who continue day in and day out to put out statements. Is the media covering it? I don't have control over the media to cover these stories. And I don't have to prove to anyone that I am an American born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. And my parents chose to come to the United States from living under military occupation in Palestine.
There has been a study after study of the material that have been found in different mosques across the country, research after research, and these are factual research that have been presented to our government.
Do you do terrorism? Are you a terrorism analyst on terrorism in general? What about the Las Vegas shooting, the manifestos, the Oak Creek shooting where white supremacists walked into a Gurdwara and killed 6 people?
Terrorists are terrorists. Terrorists are terrorists. Well, I immigrated to the United States and I continued having the Middle East as my focus. And that's what I talk about.
Brigitte claimed to be a terrorism analyst. However, when pressed by the sister on why she only focuses on Muslims and not Christians who shoot up schools and places of worship in the US, Brigitte snitched on herself by revealing she strictly limits her analysis to the Middle East, basically admitting to her bias and bigotry. Because if she was truly focused on the Middle East without an anti-Islam agenda, how could she miss the biggest extremist regime in the region, which is the Zionist Israeli government and the IDF? As the sister pointed out, the Western media deliberately don't report on this because they have an anti-Islam agenda. And we can trace this all back to Israeli propaganda, as the majority of the owners of these mainstream media companies are staunch Zionists. What's ironic is that Sister Linda was born in America after her parents managed to escape the actual extremism of the Israelis who occupied her homeland of Palestine. And Brigitte migrated to the US from Lebanon after Israel fueled Muslim and Christian tensions there, on top of invading and committing massacres. But of course, Brigitte refuses to speak about that. As Sister Linda stated, Brigitte poses as a token shill, feigning credibility credibility due to being able to speak Arabic whilst peddling anti-Muslim propaganda. Brigitte talked about studies to back up her Islamophobic claims, but failed to name even one of these so-called studies. But that's the tactics the Zionists use. They make wild claims with no actual evidence to back them up. Even the CNN host was shocked by Brigitte's level of discrimination, calling her out as a fraud for targeting only Muslims when Christians have also committed horrific acts of extremism. And in response, Brigitte folded like a cheap suit. Let's watch the next clip.
Linda, do you feel there are specific examples of times where the media has fanned the flames of misunderstanding about Islam?
Absolutely. I mean, let's look at the Boston bombing. The first front page story came out on the New York Post of two young Algerian boys with book bags, calling them the bagmen. Immediately when an incident happens in this country that includes someone who just happens to be of an Arab country of origin or Muslim, we immediately start talking about terrorism and domestic terrorism. And when we have the same cases, similar cases, shootings almost every week in this country where dozens of people are being killed at the hands of guns and lax gun control, I'm more worried about getting shot by a gun or by a shooter in the US than I am from a terrorist attack. The media oftentimes, including Fox News in particular, who actually does hit series on people like me for standing up and speaking my mind and practicing my American patriotism, the media does play a role in this, but it also gives, again, the platform to people who are pseudo-experts. And just because you grew up in the Middle East and just because you supposedly lived under a war doesn't make you a terrorism analyst. There are people who have extensive training in this area and at the same time can talk about very fringe Islamic terrorism without talking about Islam as a religion being a threat. The fastest growing religion in the country. And what Miss Gabriel and her friends don't say is that many of the foiled plots that in this country have been foiled by information that came directly from the community, in some cases even the immediate family members of those who were alleged to be organizing a terrorist attack or traveling to places like Pakistan and others.
We're talking about, as two Americans, about how we can protect our country. We are both faced with an enemy wishing both our destruction. When you're talking about plots of mass scale, somebody parking a car about to explode in Times Square, or want to blow up the subway system in New York, or want to blow up the Sears Tower in Chicago, we're talking about the mass killing of thousands of Americans, if not millions. That is what we need to be discussing and how we can protect the country.
Isn't that fear-mongering? To use the words like thousands and millions, isn't that fear-mongering?
The idea here is that you want to talk about terrorism, let's talk about terrorism and let's be prepared. But let's not prepare the American people that all terrorism that happens around the world comes from the Muslim community. That's the point that I want to debate with you here.
Well,
is that the idea here that terrorism is a serious issue, but terrorism does not equal Islam, it does not equal Muslims. I am from New York. I live in New York. I was here in New York on 9/11, Miss Gabriel. I understand the impact that 9/11 had on communities in New York City. I could have been in the World Trade Center. I could be dead here today. There were Muslim responders. There were Muslims. 75 Muslims died in 9/11, including a first responder, Salman Hamdani. So I want you to understand that if you want to combat terrorism, you need to work within the Muslim community. You need to make sure that we are part of that discussion. And the quote moderate Muslims that you're talking about, which are almost every Muslim living here in this country, need to be part of this discussion. But to alienate the Muslim community, create them as the other, and to start making over exaggerations about these potential attacks that haven't happened is not the way that you combat terrorism in any country.
Sister Linda gave numerous examples of how the mainstream media are quick to label any incidents involving Muslims as extremism, but when people from other backgrounds and faiths do similar things, they report on it differently, which again is blatant discrimination. As the sister said, the US has a bigger problem with domestic extremism in the form of school shootings than they do with so-called Muslim extremism, with the perpetrators being either atheists or Christians like Brigitte, with hundreds of schools being targeted for many decades now. Well done to the sister for calling Brigitte out for being the fake pseudo-analyst that she is. Sister Linda correctly stated that just because Brigitte is from Lebanon, it doesn't make her an expert on extremism, because real experts don't limit themselves to targeting one religious group, and instead analyse data from every group to come up with clear and accurate conclusions. As Sister Linda said, Muslims have not only reported acts of extremism to the authorities, they have also been the victims in attacks such as 9/11, as well as emergency service workers rescuing injured Americans. And let's be honest, many Americans and non-Muslims also believe that Muslim extremists were not behind 9/11, but instead that it was a false flag event conducted by Israel in order to drag America into a war with Iraq on their behalf. I liked how Sister Linda laughed in Brigitte's face when she falsely claimed that Muslims are responsible for the mass killing of millions of Americans. Not only is that completely fabricated claim, it's totally hypocritical, because if we just look at the US invasion of Iraq, the figures show that it is in fact the Americans that are responsible for the deaths of millions of Muslims, not the other way around. Even the CNN host was flabbergasted by Brigitte's lies, accusing her of fearmongering. As the sister said, we should be discussing extremism across the board with the aim of eradicating it, instead of pretending it's a Muslim-only issue.